Let's get into politics in Washington right now. The $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure package right now is what they are debating, and U.S. senators are haggling over funding of the $1 trillion infrastructure compromise. And the question is, can they get bipartisan support for that? Joe?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be Jonathan Lemire. I guess the big question right now is, as they're trying to move towards an infrastructure deal, here you find you find Joe Manchin once again in the middle of things, trying to bring people together, trying to bring Republicans and Democrats together, coming up with compromises. Mitt Romney, others also involved in this compromise. But the big question is, are they going to be able to get to 60? Or at some point, is Joe Manchin going to be pushed? And I think most likely he will be pushed into moving to some other position, because don't you get the impression one way or the other Manchin's going to see this legislation passed?
It does seem that way, Joe, and happy belated Father's Day to you. Manchin, of course, has become the focal point of this entire negotiations, where the White House has been leaning on him. Certainly, he's hearing it from more progressive Democrats as well. We have this bipartisan group, and this seems to be a make-or-break week for this possible infrastructure deal. The president, of course, had been overseas for most of the last week and a half, and then had a largely down weekend in Delaware. And he has said, and his aides have signaled, that this is the week where he's going to re-engage on this, and they will see if they can do it. And they're going to have, it's a balancing act. Certainly, this is not nearly the figure that the White House first put out there for an infrastructure bill, the hard stuff of highways, broadband, bridges, things like that. There's some heat from the left, from Democrats, saying, like, why are you compromising here? This is a moment where we could go big. We have control. We may not have control that much longer. But yet, I think the president and his energy, they've really focused on trying to get Republican buy-in, at least on this part of it. There may be a second part, the CARES Act, where they use just Dems only through reconciliation. They want to come up with a deal here to get some Republicans on board. The question is, can they get to 10? And that's the arithmetic that we're all going to be watching this week.
Yeah, it's going to be a balancing act. And Mika, it's something we talked to AOC about last Thursday when she was on the show. I have been really struck by how Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, AOC, some of the other leaders on the progressive side have really sat back. Of course, you have people on the right always trying to say they're crazy, they're out of their mind, they're irrational. Right. Throughout this entire process, they've sat back. They have allowed the conversation to rotate around Joe Manchin and the more conservative members of the Democratic Party, and have really held their ground, have remained quiet for the most part. But Bernie Sanders is now speaking out, and some others are speaking out. And of course, that's just how Washington works. It's how it should work. You have this back and forth, and you want to make sure, if you're a progressive, and obviously that's where the energetic part of the Democratic Party is, to make sure that your progressive base knows that there's somebody there fighting for you. So you got Bernie now saying, okay, great, we're talking about Manchin nonstop, but hey, we're over here as well. And that, when you start hearing that, you're starting to think, okay, maybe this thing is moving further towards a negotiated settlement where both sides are going to want to make sure that their voices are heard in that final mix. And, we may be a couple of weeks away from it. Who knows? Maybe a couple months away from it. But it does seem to be going in that direction.
Well, Joe, you know how these things work, and you know Joe Manchin well. You've worked with these guys. You mentioned the heat from the left. Here is Senator Bernie Sanders. Take a look.
What is in the bipartisan bill in terms of spending is, from what I can see, mostly good. It is roads and bridges, and we need to do that. That is what we are proposing in our legislation, but in much greater numbers.
I was interested in hearing from my colleague, Senator Sanders. You said at one point, with regard to the $6 trillion package, the list goes on, and that's the problem. I mean, it's not about infrastructure. It's kind of a $6 trillion grab bag of progressive priorities. Ours is about core infrastructure.
And I guess, Richard Haass, that's going to be the question. What's going to be able, let's talk 60 votes. We don't think it's going to get, nothing's going to get 60 votes, I don't think. So then we start looking at what can get 50 votes, or if they do change to 55, if that becomes the new number for filibusters, what gets the 55 votes? I don't think that $6 trillion package is going to get close to getting those votes. The question is, will enough progressive support, $1 trillion, $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill to get that passed?
Yeah, you've got the dynamic of the scale of the bill, which you say, and can you come up with a Goldilocks that's enough for the progressives and not too much for others? And then, Joe, I think it's going to possibly be as difficult or more is what the approach is to funding it. You simply run up the deficit and the debt. Do you raise taxes? If so, which ones and how much? Because $1 trillion may not be a $2 trillion bill, but the last I counted, $1 trillion is still a lot of money. And I think that's going to be the other debate. So this has to go through, if you will, two separate hurdles or two separate thresholds, and that's asking quite a lot.
Yeah, it's asking a lot. And you look at the trillions of dollars, Mika, that have already been spent over the past year. And it is going to be extraordinarily hard, even from conservative to moderate Democrats, to get much beyond that $1.2, $1.3 trillion. Because what are we starting to hear about more and more? Inflationary pressures on the economy. So with inflationary pressure, with the deficit going up, with the federal debt going up, this has been happening now over 3 administrations. And the big question is there the will to go far beyond the $1.2 trillion? Right now, I just don't see that happening.